I logged into my FetLife account on Thursday, having been notified of a message waiting for me via email. I didn't recognize the sender's handle. Great. It was probably another asshole male dominant thinking I could be put in my place. I'd gotten a slew of those lately. Why they couldn't understand that women could be dominants also, I didn't know. As the page loaded for me, I clicked the envelope at the top right and went to my inbox. Upon seeing the title, I sighed and rolled my eyes. No, it wasn't a male dom. This was worse than a male dom. Want to serve you, mistress. Well, hell. I swore and clicked the title. Might as well see what he had to say. Hello, mistress. I hope you're doing well today. You are very pretty. I would love to take your big strap-on in my virgin ass. For a second, I just stared. Knowing I needed to formulate the proper rejection response, I went to his profile. Oh, joy. He lived by me. He would be attending the munch tomorrow night as well. Oh, fuck my life. Going back to the message, I sighed and clicked reply. I'm sorry, but I'm not accepting any new submissives at the moment. I wish you luck in your journey and hope you find someone suitable for you. Darkness. It was tempting to throw in there, learn to speak proper English to your future dom. But I figured it'd just go over his head and incite further communication. And yes, these type of messages are more common than I care to admit when you're a dom. Men really don't have a clue sometimes. Logging out of my account, I got up from the computer and set about cleaning up the house. I didn't give it any further thought. In my mind, the conversation was over with. Imagine my irritation when, 4 hours later, I checked my email and saw he had written me again. I see you will be at Munch, Mistress Darkness. Will you talk to me there? I want to serve you, Mistress Darkness. You are so pretty. Oh, for fuck's sake, I muttered. I'm middle-aged, wrinkled, and a complete sadist. Why in the hell are you pushing your luck with me? I'm not that pretty, really. There are a dozen other doms in the area that look far better than I do. I have told you no. No means no. Yes, I am attending, but I have no interest in you as a submissive. Please respect that. I hit send and logged out again, and this time I did not log back on. The following day saw me running errands and feeding my Burmese python, Banana. I'd had Banana for a while now. She was my sweetheart. 10 feet of albino muscle with the disposition of a puppy. I could let her roam freely about the house, without worry of her getting into something or trying to escape. Her favorite thing to do was curl up half beside me and half on my lap while I read. She scared the shit out of the FedEx delivery driver, but that was okay with me. I hated FedEx. A quick check of my email showed there was no response back from Subboy for you, so I assumed he had gotten the hint. I hoped he had, at least. Otherwise, tonight was going to be ugly. At around 5, I got a shower and got myself together to go to the munch. It was held at the local pub, in the upstairs area away from regular customers. I dressed casually, not seeing the point in advertising what I was. 90% of the group that met there knew me. Those that did not were quick to be told and warned off. I had a reputation, one that was well earned. I liked to bleed boys out, to leave bruises, and I loved ass play. Sure, I could play with beginners, but I preferred an experienced masochist. Grabbing my keys and purse, I headed out the door at 6. When I arrived at the pub, there was already a small crowd forming in the upstairs area. Mostly people I knew, as I had expected, but I did see a couple of new faces. I wondered if one of them was the pushy asshole that had messaged me. He didn't have any photos on his profile, so I had no way of knowing. "Hello, Darkness, my old friend," Dan teased, walking up to me. I laughed and hugged him, glad to see him there. "I was hoping you'd be here," I told him. "Haven't seen you in a while, stranger." He shrugged. "Been busy with work. How've things been with you? How's Banana?" "Things are good, and Banana is fat and happy," I answered, going with him to sit at the table. "I did have some trouble with someone who's supposed to be here, but hopefully my last message got the point across." "Oh?" "Horrible grammar. And he wanted me to use the biggest cock I had on his virgin ass. His words, not mine." I sighed, shaking my head. I told him no, and he came back at me again, asking if I'd be here, and stating he wanted to serve me because I'm so pretty. "And you didn't jump at the chance to make him your bitch?" Dan asked, picking at me. "Really, Dan?" I countered, eyebrow raised. "Hon, I'm just kidding with you, you know that." He sighed now, looking at the assembled crowd. "Is he here?" "I don't know," I said. "He didn't have any photos. Anyhow, I told him I had said no and that no meant no, and for him to respect that. He didn't respond, so maybe he got the hint." "And if he didn't?" Dan pushed. I stilled, my face going a bit stony. "Then he'll learn, Dan," I murmured. As the rest of the group filtered in, I sat with Dan talking about various things and looking at everyone. There was a guy who had shown up that none of the women seemed to care for, but after watching him, I could understand why. He was older, at least in his late 40s, and wore this goofy grin. He didn't seem to understand personal boundaries either, the way he walked right up to people and leaned into their personal space. He was a bit handsy also, I noted. Well, he wouldn't last long here. Everyone eventually settled at the long table, and Gary started the introductions. "Hi, folks. Welcome to the Rio Munch. I'm Gary, but you probably know me better as Slim Jim Whipmaker." I didn't really pay much attention to introductions, knowing when I would need to make mine. But when the new guy spoke up and introduced himself, I just looked at Dan in resignation. "I'm Subboy for you," he stated, grinning and looking at everyone. "But you can call me Greg." "Great," Dan muttered. "So that is him. Let's hope he got the message for his sake." When it came my turn, I sighed. "I'm Darkness. I'm the resident sadist, and I'm not looking for anyone at the moment." "But what's your real name?" I met Greg's eyes, giving him the look, as Dan called it. It should have killed him where he sat, but he just licked his lips at me. "We aren't required to give our real names here, and really, it's not your business," I answered firmly. Food and drinks were ordered, and Gary got down to business, discussing upcoming events at the local dungeon as well as raffles and such. Selena stood up to go over consent in a scene, as well as negotiations and limits, and then Gary stood back up talking about a demo he was hoping to provide on cutting. "Darkness, would you do us the honor of the demo?" he asked, smiling. I mulled it over for a moment. "Sure," I agreed. "I'll bring Anna with me. She loves to be cut." "I'll be your volunteer." Grinding my teeth, I met Greg's eyes again. "No," I told him firmly. Boy, he just doesn't get the hint, does he? Dan muttered, shaking his head. Apparently not, I murmured, beyond irritated at this point. Towards the end of the night, when everyone had gotten up to mingle, I happened to walk past Gary talking to Greg the asshole on my way to the ladies' room. No one here knows you, Greg, and if you keep pushing these ladies, especially Darkness, I'll have you banned, Gary told him. I mean that. I didn't stick around to hear his response, not seeing the point. Gary had issued a formal warning with some weight to it. If he chose not to listen, he was gone. At 11, I headed home. I talked to those I wanted to talk to and agreed to do the demo, so there was no sense in sticking around. I wasn't much of a drinker, and they were starting to order drinks now, so it was time to leave. My house sat back off the road quite some ways, into the woods. I had a trail that led almost a mile back into the denser section of the woods, ending at a spot I had cleared. There was a large, flat rock there, and I used it to leave offerings on to the ones I worked with. I mostly left wine, flowers, and food items, but occasionally I would leave blood. My own, of course. I had a pit dug also, where I would light bonfires. It was my own private sanctuary, away from prying eyes. Pulling into my parking spot, I shut the car off and got out to go inside. Hearing tires coming up the driveway, I narrowed my eyes. I wasn't expecting anyone. Quickly, I went into the house and locked the door behind me, turning off all the lights as well. I wanted to see who this was, and I didn't want to encourage them to knock at the door. When the truck rolled to a stop behind my car and the driver got out, I felt pure rage well up inside me. It was Greg, the grinning asshole. Subboy for you. He must have tailed me on the way home, and I hadn't seen him. I knew no one at the Munch would have dared give him any information on me that was personal. Watching him through the curtains, I saw him go over to my car. He ran his hands over the driver's door, and then leaned down to lick the handle. Gross, I muttered, mentally making a note to bleach it as soon as I got rid of him. But then he took things further, whipping out his dick to rub it on the door handle as well. I stepped back from the window, mulling over my options. Calling the police seldom did any good, at least where I lived. They'd arrest him for trespassing, but he'd be out in a day or so and back again, and I didn't want him ever coming back to my house. I could have shot him, but I didn't want to go to jail myself, so that wasn't a good option either. A knock at the door brought me out of my thoughts, and I looked over at it. Answering it wasn't an option, and surely if I didn't answer, he would leave. I backed away from the door to the hall to make sure he didn't see me. The knob began twisting and twitching then, but I wasn't too concerned. I had the deadbolt on after all. He could try the doorknob all day long, but even if he got it to turn, he wouldn't be able to unlock the deadbolt. When it stopped, I nodded to myself. Go home, asshole, I breathed, wanting to go to the kitchen to make hot tea for myself before I went to bed. I heard a series of odd noises then, slightly metallic in origin, but it never even occurred to me that he would be that obsessed with me. When my front door swung open, well, he forced my hand. Grabbing up the dagger from my altar, I glared at him. You shouldn't have done that, I hissed, and turned to go through the kitchen to the back door. I knew he would follow me. He was too stupid not to. Racing out the door and leaving it open behind me, I headed down the trail to my clearing. I could hear footfalls behind me, so I knew he was coming after me. Well, as I had told Dan, he would learn. As I neared my altar stone, I sliced my palm open and then slapped it down in the center. The fear and rage I felt coursed through me, bleeding out and into that stone, even as he appeared from the trail. "You should have just said yes," Greg told me, his grin turning sickly sweet. "You should have said yes, darkness, and not run from me. I'm a good tracker, you see. I'll find you, no matter where you run in these woods." "I'm not running, Greg," I said, keeping my hand on the stone. "But if you think to do me harm out here, I would suggest rethinking things." "And why is that?" he demanded, taking a step towards me to see what I do. I let the darkness fill my eyes and stood my ground. "Because out here, I can sacrifice you to my gods, and no one will know." The moon went behind a cloud then, casting the clearing in complete darkness. Greg moved closer to where he thought I was, but didn't find me. "I told you, you can run all you want, but I'll find you," he called, waiting for his eyes to adjust while he listened for sounds that would tell him where I was. I was seated on the stone, however, having moved up there for good reason. I said not a word to him. I simply waited for what I knew was coming. When the enormous heart burst into the clearing, his antlers and tails flaming, I admit I was surprised. I had expected someone else to answer the call, but this was perfectly fine. The heart snorted, staring Greg down as he advanced on him. "What the hell are you?" Greg asked, eyes wide in terror. The heart was easily 8 feet tall, and that was besides the whole flaming antlers and tail bit. "I'm her friend," came the sibilant response. "Tell me, human, do you think you can run from me?" Greg started to turn to do just that, and the heart charged him with his head lowered. I watched as those fiery antlers scooped him up, impaling him in spots. I smiled when Greg howled in pain, in sheer terror as well. When the heart slung him into the air, I laughed. Greg came straight back down on those fiery tines. The longest ones pierced his eye and came out the back of his skull, pierced his heart, and pierced his left thigh. Blood ran in rivulets from the wounds, feeding the fires, until there was a miniature conflagration on the heart's head. I sat on the altar and watched the fire consume Greg's body, until nothing but ash remained. The heart shook his head and then turned to me. "He is dealt with now." "Yes, I can see that," I mused. "Thank you, Furfur. I owe you for this." "You owe me nothing," he said, and was gone into the darkness of the woods. The next day, Dan called me. "Hey, how did the night go?" I chuckled. "A certain grinning asshole showed up at my door last night," I told him. "You've gotta be shitting me. Who the fuck told him where you live?" "No one did, Dan. He must have followed me and I didn't see him," I replied. I convinced him to go deer hunting in my woods. Haven't seen him since, I'm afraid." It took a moment for it to sink in, what I just said, but when it did, Dan laughed loudly. "That fucker should have known better than to mess with you." I smiled. "Oh, I think he got the point quite clearly."